When I inherited my grandfather's beachfront cabin, I expected peaceful summers and nostalgic repairs. Instead, I got a neighbor who claimed my land as her own, turning a quiet lot into a battleground of entitlement. Watch how a locked gate, a few cameras, and a lot of patience unraveled her story in this gripping tale of property, persistence, and standing your ground.
Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time. Step away from the gate.
The sheriff's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of the badge and the crowd watching. Karen, barefoot and in a silk robe, pointed a trembling finger at me. Her words slicing the air like broken glass.
This is harassment. I've been
using that lot for 10 years, and no little man with a clipboard is going to tell me I can't walk where I please.
Horror.
Voice cracked with outrage, but her eyes darted toward the mounted security camera, still blinking red.
The guard
I'd hired that weekend, a retired military contractor named Lucas, remained stone-faced behind her, arms crossed, not moving, not blinking, his badge clearly visible on his vest.
I'm
not moving until someone explains why I'm being treated like a criminal on my own beach.
Karen snapped, spinning
toward the sheriff, then to the HOA president, then to me, desperate for
someone to agree with her.
The irony, she was the only one not invited to this
Saturday morning community brunch, and everyone knew exactly why. My neighbors,
some recording, some sipping coffee, stood silently behind the locked wrought iron gate she tried to force open with a
metal rake.
Her claim that the lot was community overflow, never mind the title
deed with my name, the survey stakes and the no trespassing sign she pretended not to see.
The sheriff, tired of her shouting, took one step forward and
unclipped his radio. Dispatch, I'm going to need a second unit out here. Possible. Repeat offender. Karen's face dropped as her husband, red-faced and sweating, finally arrived from their jeep, trying to smooth things over. Honey, let's just go, please.
She yanked her arm from his
grip, furious. Don't you dare take his side. That was the exact moment the brunch group began to murmur.
Some rolled their eyes, others turned to whisper, and I stayed exactly where I was, hands behind my back, watching as the woman who'd been sneaking onto my property for months finally lost control
of the narrative. But this moment wasn't the beginning. It was the boiling point.
The beginning started with the first morning I stepped onto my grandfather's old cabin lot and saw her lawn chairs sitting 10 feet from my porch. It started 6 weeks earlier when I had inherited the
beach cabin after my grandfather passed.
He had built it in the 70s, and while it
needed new paint and an updated septic system, the lot was oceanfront gold,
tucked between dunes and just wide enough to legally fence.
I wasn't planning to live there, just fix it up and maybe rent it out on weekends.
That first Saturday, I arrived with coffee and a sketch pad.
I found 2 foldable
beach chairs, an umbrella, and a pair of pink flip-flops resting in the sand.
I
assumed they belonged to tourists, maybe folks who didn't know this wasn't public access.
I moved the items politely to one side and thought nothing of it.
But 2 days later, they were back.
Same
chairs, same flip-flops, now with a half-empty bottle of tanning oil and a
magazine open on a page about luxury coastal decor. I called the HOA office
just to ask who might be mistaking the property for open space.
Oh,
that's probably Karen, the secretary said
without hesitation.
She uses that stretch sometimes when her deck's in the shade.
She says it's always been that way. I blinked. Always been that way on land she didn't own. That's when I introduced myself to Karen.
I knocked on her door, which stood just 3 lots over in a much larger, polished beach home. She answered with a polite but empty smile.
One of those smiles that evaporates if you hold eye contact too long.
Oh, you must be Harold's grandson, she said sweetly, ushering me into a foyer that smelled of lemon cleaner and artificial roses.
We were all so sad to hear about his passing. Such a kind man. He never minded when we used the sandlot. It's such a shame for it to go to waste during the week. I hesitated, trying not to sound rude. Right. I just wanted to say it's private property now. I've started coming out to fix it up. I'll probably build a fence next month. Her face twitched, barely perceptible before her smile returned. Of course. Of course. You do what you need to do. But something in her tone said she didn't believe I actually would. The following weekend, I arrived to find not just chairs, but a full pop-up canopy, Bluetooth speaker, and a cooler wedged into the corner of the deck. No one was there, but music still played from the speaker. I snapped a photo and sent it to the HOA email with a short message. Unauthorized use of private lot. Please advise. No response. Instead, Karen approached me in person. 2 days later, right as I was unloading wood from my truck. Listen, she said. Her voice tight. I think there's been a misunderstanding. That strip by the dune has always been shared. It's been used by families here for generations. I offered a polite shake of the head. I have the survey right here in the glove box. The lot line's clear. She stepped back like I'd insulted her personally. Wow. You know, Harold would have never been so territorial. He believed in community. That's when it hit me. This wasn't confusion. This was entitlement dressed as nostalgia. She wasn't using the property. She believed she deserved it. Over the next 2 weeks, her visits became more frequent and more theatrical. I'd find her walking her dog across the lot, letting it dig near the pilings. Once I found a yoga mat rolled out with scented candles beside it, still smoking. Another time, she waved at me from my own hammock, sipping sparkling water like it was a resort. Each time I confronted her with increasing firmness, but she always smiled, shrugged, and made me feel like I was the irrational one. Why are you being so aggressive? She asked once, as if the fence posts I'd laid out were a threat, not a boundary. It's not like we're hurting anything. The final straw came when I arrived late one Friday night and found 2 teenagers roasting marshmallows on my fire pit. They were her nephews, apparently. And when I told them to leave, they laughed and said, Karen said it was chill. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I simply installed cameras the next day. The very next morning, my camera caught her dragging a hose across my lot and watering the dune grass like she was its caretaker. I downloaded every clip, organized them by date, and called the sheriff's department. I didn't accuse. I asked for guidance. They advised me to put up posted signs, document every incident, and if she crossed the line again, file a trespass complaint. So, I did all of that. The next time she walked onto my property, I didn't speak. I just watched. And when she touched the gate, the new camera blinked, the motion alert pinged my phone, and the small cliffhanger I'd been waiting for finally arrived. Karen didn't just step onto my lot that morning. She ripped the gate open and stormed in with a beach rake, shouting something about reclaiming public space. That's when I made the call that changed everything. The sheriff was already nearby, and this time the whole community would see exactly what she thought she could get away with. It was strange how quickly something as simple as a weathered piece of beach property could unravel into a social landmine. Inheriting my grandfather's cabin had felt like a quiet blessing at first, a bittersweet chance to preserve a piece of my childhood, and the only place that had ever felt untouched by the noise of life. My grandfather had always kept it simple.
A hand-built wood cabin with storm shutters, a wraparound porch, and a rickety swing that creaked like it had a soul of its own. Growing up, it was the place where summer had no clocks. And the only rules were don't track sand inside and never leave food out for raccoons.
When he passed and left the
deed to me, I drove out expecting a nostalgic project, maybe even a few
weeks of peace.
What I got instead was a bizarre, escalating feud with a woman who seemed to believe her years of squatting privileges made her the rightful heir to land she never owned. The first few days were quiet. I painted the porch rails, swept out cobwebs, and
patched holes in the screen door.
But every time I left tools outside, even
for a few hours, something would be moved. Paint cans nudged behind a bush,
with planks neatly res-tacked but in the wrong corner. My gloves relocated to a chair that wasn't mine.
At first I
blamed wind or animals.
Then I noticed a detail I couldn't ignore. The chair was one of the ones I'd seen Karen using before. Floral cushion, faint coffee stain on the armrest.
I moved it off the lot and stacked it against her own gate.
A subtle signal that this boundary wasn't going to be vague anymore.
The next morning, the chair was back this
time with a note tucked under the cushion. Just being neighborly. Let me know if you need anything moved. No
signature, no apology, just the passive-aggressive friendliness that made my stomach twist.
When I mentioned it to the HOA office again, the response was evasive. Karen's very active in the community. The same secretary told me over the phone.
She's on the events committee and helps plan the holiday
walk. Maybe just have a polite chat. I almost laugh. That was my polite chat.
She had flipped it into a social courtesy.
What stunned me wasn't her boldness.
It was how smoothly she played
the game. Karen didn't storm in screaming like a cartoon villain.
She crept in with offers to help and passive phrases like, "Oh, I thought it was okay,"
or "I didn't think it would bother you." She never asked permission.
She simply acted, and if caught, she acted confused. It was a strategy built
on plausible deniability and social capital.
And she wielded it like a scalpel.
After 2 more incidents, once
with her dog tied to my porch rail while she hosted a book club across the street, and once with her setting up a borrowed ping-pong table in my side yard for neighborhood kids,
I decided to start logging everything. Not confrontations, just time-stamped documentation.
Every action, no matter how small, went into a folder on my desktop labeled
Cabin Karen. It felt excessive at first, even paranoid. But something in me knew. This wasn't just boundary confusion.
This was erosion, 1 inch at a time.
Until she claimed the whole dune.
Then came the Sunday brunch that turned everything. I had invited 3 friends from the city to stay the weekend, partly to keep me company, partly to introduce them to the place I hoped to
rent out eventually.
We were grilling salmon, playing soft music, and sipping lemonade when she walked through the
gate like she lived there.
No knock, no wave, just a purposeful march across the sand, wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying a tray of deviled eggs.
Thought
I'd bring a little something for the crowd, she said with a smile that dripped syrup.
My friends looked at me, confused.
I stepped forward to meet her halfway, quietly blocking her from
walking farther onto the porch.
Karen, I said, calm but firm.
This is a private brunch. I didn't invite you. Her face didn't twitch, not even slightly.
She tilted her head.
Oh, come on. Don't be silly. You said you were trying to build community. I'm just helping.
I paused, stunned by the spin.
No, I said again. You can't just walk in.
Please respect the space.
There was a beat of silence too long for comfort. She held the tray out, forcing me to either accept or reject it physically. I didn't touch it. Finally, she turned and left without another word, still smiling like the host of a party that had gone unexpectedly cold. But the next morning, I woke to a HOA complaint filed against me for exclusionary behavior and discouraging community involvement. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a handwriting analyst. That was when I escalated. I had tried polite. I had tried neutral.
Now, I bought 4 motion-activated trail cameras and began
recording everything. I also paid a land surveyor to clearly mark the lot boundaries and submitted the updated records to the county. I emailed the HOA with a full copy of the deed, the footage of her walking her dog and rearranging my property, and a list of the incidents I had logged. The response: they acknowledged the footage, but claimed they could not mediate interpersonal property disputes. They also reminded me that long-standing neighborhood customs should be respected. That last sentence lit a fire in my chest. It wasn't just them ignoring me. It was them siding with someone because she made herself useful. She baked muffins. She chaired the wine crawl. I built fences and filed paperwork. The worst part, she knew they'd back her. She had immunity through charm. That week, I caught her again, this time moving one of the survey markers. The camera showed her pausing, glancing around, then bending, and nudging it 6 in to the left with her foot. It was subtle, calculated, but enough to shift a property argument if it ever reached court. I printed still frames from the footage, labeled them, and started calling law offices. Most didn't take it seriously until I mentioned the footage. One firm offered a free consultation. I scheduled it immediately. Meanwhile, I made sure to start locking the gate every night, even if I was home. I drilled in a latch and added signage that made the boundaries legally clear. That's when she left a voicemail on my phone, her voice drenched in faux concern. "Hey, I noticed you locked the gate. Just wanted to make sure everything was okay. People are starting to feel unwelcome and a little sad. Let me know if you want to talk." I didn't reply. The next day, the gate had scratches near the lock as if someone had tried jiggling it with a key that didn't fit. When I watched the footage, I saw her pause at the fence, look both ways, and try the handle twice before walking off. No tools, no break-in, just a test, a quiet dare. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't confused or careless. She was methodical, calculating, testing for weaknesses in character and compliance. She was used to getting her way, not through threats or rage, but through pressure and perception. People gave in because saying no to her made you the difficult one. That night, I knew I had to do more than install cameras. I needed to create consequences, not just for trespassing, but for the quiet way she weaponized community against me. I didn't want a war. I wanted a record. The next morning, I called the sheriff's office again. I sent the updated footage. I asked for official trespass documentation. This time, they didn't brush me off. "We'll log it," the deputy said. "Let us know if she sets foot on the lot again. You've got enough to file." The next few days passed in an eerie sort of quiet. Karen didn't appear. No beach chairs on the sand. No yoga mats laid out like she was preparing for sunrise rituals. No signs of her nephews digging holes or tossing frisbees across my dune grass. At first, I wondered if the cameras in calls had finally struck a nerve. Maybe the sheriff's department had warned her behind closed doors. Or maybe someone on the HOA board had finally pulled her aside and said, "Enough. But that silence only lasted until Wednesday afternoon when I returned from a supply run and found a printed flyer pinned to my porch railing with a thumbtack. The corners curled from the sea breeze, but the message was unmistakable. Community beach cleanup sponsored by Karen. Meet at 10 a.m. on lot number 46, my lot. I stood there staring at it, trying to decide whether to laugh, yell, or march over to her front door and demand an explanation. But I didn't do any of that. I took the flyer down, photographed it, filed it in my digital log, and waited. The next morning, I installed a microphone along with the camera near the gate. If she wanted to host events on private property, I'd give her a public stage. Saturday arrived with that high sun kind of heat that sticks to your skin. And sure enough, by 10 o'clock, a group of about 8 people were milling around just outside the gate, holding trash bags, rakes, and iced coffee. Karen arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a pastel windbreaker, waving like she was the mayor of the beach. "We're just going to clean up the shoreline," she chirped loud enough for the microphone to catch every word. "Should only take an hour. Feel free to sit on the deck if you need shade." She didn't even glance toward the house. It was like I didn't exist. Like the locks, the cameras, and the emails had all been a temporary inconvenience in the grand theater of her delusion. I stayed inside, watching from the window, letting the footage roll. It was a careful line. If I confronted her in the moment, I'd look hostile. But if I caught her unlocking the gate, walking through, or encouraging others to cross the line, that was trespassing. And this time, I wouldn't need to explain it to anyone. The evidence would speak for itself. Around 10:40, someone in the group pointed out that the public beach gate was locked. Karen marched over, tested the handle, then turned to the crowd and said, "Oh, he must have locked it by mistake. It's fine. I have the old spare from when Harold was alive." She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a key. My stomach dropped. I didn't even know an old key existed. But sure enough, she inserted it, turned it once, and the latch clicked. The gate swung open and 6 of them walked right in, chatting like they were entering a park they'd reserved. I hit record on my phone as I watched the screen, documenting the live footage in case something corrupted later. Karen walked straight to my deck, set down a tray of muffins, and began pouring lemonade into plastic cups she'd brought herself. One man even sat on the hammock, tipping his sunglasses up to admire the view. It was surreal. She'd staged a full community gathering on land that wasn't hers, lied about permission, and had the audacity to act like I was the rude one for locking a gate. I didn't go outside. I didn't yell. I simply forwarded the footage and the audio to the sheriff's office with a brief message. Unauthorized entry, use of private space, confirmed use of outdated key. Please advise. I also included the flyer and the timestamp. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. A deputy named Martinez asked if I could meet him at the lot the following morning. He wanted to see the locks and cameras in person, verify everything before filing charges. I agreed. That night, I changed the lock and reinforced the latch with a steel bracket. The next morning, Karen was back, this time alone. She approached the new gate and tried the same key. When it didn't work, she tilted her head, stared at the hinges, then cupped her hands around her eyes, and peered through the bars like a disappointed shopper. When she saw me step outside, she smiled like we were sharing an inside joke. "Looks like someone's been busy," she said. I didn't answer. I simply locked the door behind me and waited for Deputy Martinez to arrive. When he pulled up in his cruiser, Karen's smile faltered. She waved, pretending to greet a friend. Martinez didn't wave back. He walked past her and onto my property, clipboard in hand, nodding at the gate. We walked the perimeter together. I showed him the exact spots where the camera wires ran. The saved footage, the flyer, and the audio clip of her unlocking the gate and inviting people in. He reviewed everything with the calm precision of someone who'd seen neighbor disputes turn ugly before. After an hour of discussion and note-taking, he gave a slow nod. "You've done everything by the book. I'll file the initial trespass warning today. If she steps onto the property again after it's served, we can proceed with charges, civil or criminal, depending on damage." I thanked him, my hands still shaking from how surreal it all felt. Karen stood nearby the whole time, pretending to scroll through her phone, occasionally glancing up with that smug, polished grin. When the deputy approached her to serve the formal warning, her tone changed instantly. "Wait, this is a misunderstanding," she said. "I've been coming here for years. Harold used to let us. Everyone knows it's always been open." Martinez was polite but firm. "It's not open now. There are posted signs. There's legal proof of ownership. Continued use without permission is trespassing." She scoffed and crossed her arms. "Are we really doing this?" Over some sand and old wood, but she took the warning. She didn't crumple it. She didn't tear it up. She folded it neatly, tucked it into her purse, and walked off. Like a disappointed school teacher. But I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't the end. This was just her regrouping. Sure enough, by that evening, a new post appeared on the HOA message board. Anonymous but obvious. It accused certain residents of gatekeeping beachfront access and eroding the sense of community that has defined our neighborhood for decades. There were no names, no direct accusations, just implications wrapped in community buzzword. But the comments were revealing. Half the board defended the message, expressing sympathy for neighbors being excluded. The other half stayed silent. Only one person messaged me privately. His name was Phil and he lived 3 houses up the road. "Hey," he wrote, "just saw the HOA post. Karen's been a problem for years. You're not the first. You just might be the first with cameras. Let me know if you need a witness." I thanked him. It was the first time someone had acknowledged what I was up against. The first thread of support. The next morning, a beach towel showed up at the corner of my lot. No footprints, no chairs, just a single blue and white striped towel tucked under a rock, positioned exactly where Karen used to sunbathe. A message, a reminder, a subtle little dare. I left it there, filmed it, then bagged it and stored it in my garage. It began again with the sound of a drill. Not mine, not the contractor's, and definitely not the sound of any repair work I had scheduled. It was a worrying, impatient buzz that cut through the peaceful quiet of an early Sunday morning, the kind of sound that didn't belong in the natural rhythm of sea breeze and seagulls. I stepped out onto the porch, coffee in hand, and followed the noise toward the southern edge of my fence, the newest addition Lucas and I had just inspected the day before. What I saw made me stop. Cold. A man in jeans and a neon vest stood halfway up a ladder with a cordless drill attaching something to my fence post. Karen stood below him, arms crossed, barking directions like she was leading a landscaping crew. A little higher. "No, no, there. I don't want the wind knocking it off again." I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The man didn't work for me. I'd never seen him before. And whatever he was installing looked suspiciously like a bracket for a hose or maybe even a beach towel rack on my property. Without my permission, I marched toward the fence, my voice tight and loud. "What are you doing?" Karen turned casually as if I just interrupted a neighborhood cookout. "Oh, hi. Don't worry. It's temporary. It's just a little mount for my new sand sifter."
The wind kept blowing it over, so we figured
it'd be better to secure it here.
The man on the ladder looked down, confused, then back at her. "This is your place,
right?"
She didn't answer, just gave him a brittle smile.
"We'll be done in 5 minutes." I didn't yell. I didn't demand. I took out my phone, started recording,
and said clearly, "You're attaching hardware to my private property without permission.
You need to stop now and leave the premises."
The man froze, his drill lowering.
Karen's expression shifted. She stepped between me and the ladder like a shield.
"This is ridiculous.
This whole fence is an eyesore.
We're just trying to make the beach safer. You don't have to act like we're vandalizing your precious little
gate."
That's when Lucas came around the corner, having heard the exchange.
He
said nothing at first, just positioned himself beside me with a quiet authority that silenced the entire scene.
Karen's
handyman quickly packed up his tools and stepped down, muttering something under his breath.
Karen glared at me like I just embarrassed her at a gala.
"You're making a spectacle of yourself," she hissed.
I kept the camera pointed at her, steady as stone. "You need to leave."
She stormed off without another word, the handyman trailing behind, and I sent the footage immediately to Deputy
Martinez along with the timestamp and a note. "Direct violation of trespass.
Warning, unauthorized modification attempt."
Within 2 hours, I had a reply. He'd escalate the complaint and file it formally. The next day, I received a letter in the mail from the HOA.
It was printed on thick paper, official header
signed in ink. It claimed multiple complaints had been filed against me by various neighbors, citing aggressive
fencing, lack of community spirit, and disruption of shared access traditions.
They requested I attend an informal resolution meeting the following week. I sat on my porch with the letter in my lap, stunned by the audacity. Karen wasn't just ignoring the rules. She was rallying others to pretend they didn't exist. It wasn't about the beach anymore. It was about control narrative, making me the outsider in my own family's legacy.
I decided not to wait. The following day, I drove to the county clerk's office and filed a certified property usage affidavit, attaching
survey documents, photographs of the fencing, and a log of Karen's incidents. I didn't just want to defend myself. I wanted every step documented before things reached a boil.
Later that afternoon, I received a call from a neighbor I barely knew, a woman named
Elise, who lived 2 doors down.
She spoke quietly, nervously, like someone
whispering in church.
"I heard about the HOA letter," she said.
"Just so you
know, Karen's been holding private coffee things with some of the board members.
She's telling them you're
planning to turn the cabin into an Airbnb compound, that you're trying to lock the beach down for profit."
I sat in stunned silence for a second, then asked, why would she say that? Elise sighed.
"Because she knows how this place works. If you sound like a threat to community harmony, the HOA will rally
against you even if you've done nothing wrong. I just thought you should know. You're not crazy." I thanked her, hung up, and stared out at the ocean for a long time. It was all theater. Karen wasn't trying to win a property dispute.
She was building a social case, carefully crafting a villain out of me, so she could continue being the misunderstood hero in her story.
And she was good at it. That Friday, Lucas and I
installed an additional padlock system on the gate and welded a small steel frame around the primary latch.
Nothing flashy, just reinforcement.
But the next morning, someone had scratched the words. And no one owns the beach into the outer wood panel in what looked like a nail or sharp rock.
No one was seen on the
cameras, which made me wonder how they got close enough.
Then I realized the
scratch was on the side facing Karen's property, not the main gate. A side panel accessible only from her lot.
I
documented it, filed a vandalism report, but I knew unless I caught her in the
act, nothing would come of it. And that's when I realized I'd have to start thinking differently. She wasn't reacting to my actions.
She was reacting to my presence, my refusal to roll over.
So, I gave her something else to react to. I printed out a laminated sign with one sentence: all trespassers will be prosecuted. Then in smaller text: surveillance in use.
I posted it directly above the gate, and within the hour she appeared at the fence, took a
photo of the sign and walked away. The next morning, a different sign appeared in her yard. We support public access
and community beach traditions.
Neighbors welcome. It was positioned just high enough to be visible from my driveway.
A clear message dressed in neighborly charm, but I didn't flinch.
I
simply sent a photo to the sheriff's office and filed it in my ongoing report folder, because the thing about fences is,
they don't just mark land, they reveal character. Every plank I hammered into place showed me more of who Karen really was. That weekend, the HOA held their annual block-wide picnic.
I wasn't planning to attend, but Elise texted me that morning.
You should come. Just show face. Don't let her be the only voice. So, I did. I dressed casually, brought a
plate of grilled chicken, and showed up like I had nothing to prove. The moment I arrived, the tone shifted.
Conversations paused. Eyes flicked toward Karen, who was already holding court near the drinks table. She smiled, waved, then turned back to her audience with exaggerated politeness. We just miss the way things used to be, don't we? She said loudly. When people could just walk down to the beach without worrying about locks and legal threats. I didn't respond.
I simply walked to an empty table, set down my dish, and started chatting with Phil and Elise. Slowly, others trickled over.
Not all, but enough. And for the first time, I realized Karen's influence wasn't as absolute as she believed. She depended on silence, on people choosing politeness over truth.
But once you spoke plainly, others listened.
It was the following weekend when Karen launched her boldest move yet, and this time she didn't bother with subtlety or whispered manipulation. She went public. That Saturday morning, I woke up to a
notification on my phone linking me to a local news broadcast teaser posted on
social media. The thumbnail image was unmistakable. Karen standing barefoot by
my gate, arms crossed dramatically, with the headline above her reading, "Local
resident denied beach access by newcomer's gate."
I sat up in bed, instantly wide awake, heart pounding.
Not from fear, but from sheer disbelief. She'd called the press. She had actually spun the entire situation into a media circus.
I clicked on the clip and watched in stunned silence as a reporter, with perfect teeth and a rehearsed expression, spoke directly into the camera, her voice layered with concern. Tonight on Coastal Living News, a longtime community member fights to preserve public beach access after a newly erected gate blocks off what neighbors say has always been a shared space.
Who's right? Who's overreaching? You decide. Then came a brief clip of Karen speaking tearfully, gesturing
toward the fence as though it were a prison wall.
I just want what we've always had. This beach has always brought us together, and now we're being shut out like criminals. It's heartbreaking. The camera panned to the locked gate with my surveillance sign clearly in frame, followed by a 5-second shot of the beach from a low angle, making it look like a disputed border in a war documentary. There was no mention of the deed, no mention of the multiple trespassing incidents, no mention of the legal warning she had received. It was pure narrative warfare, and she had struck first. I felt my jaw clench as I rewatched the clip, this time, noticing the small details, the strategic use of soft piano music, the choice of words like blocked, excluded, and unwelcome. She wasn't just presenting her side. She was crafting a martyrdom. She knew exactly how to manipulate public perception, especially in a town where the line between local pride and neighbor gossip was paper thin. I paced the cabin for a solid 20 minutes. Furious and calculating. If I responded emotionally, I'd look like the aggressor. If I stayed silent, the story would stick. The media might not care about legal documents, but they couldn't ignore evidence. So, I made a decision. I wouldn't play by Karen's script. I'd show the truth in a way she couldn't spin. By noon, I had emailed the news station directly with a polite but firm message. I attached digital copies of the property survey, the deed, the county zoning documents, the trespass warnings, and 4 separate clips from the surveillance cameras, each showing Karen unlocking the gate, crossing the boundary, and hosting gatherings without permission. I wrote 1 paragraph, just enough to clarify that the space in question was legally defined private property and that a history of unauthorized use had led to reasonable measured responses. I ended the note by inviting the station to contact the county clerk for verification. Then I sent a second email to a local beach rights advocacy group that had shared the news segment online. This time I included the audio of Karen telling her handyman, "We'll be done in 5 minutes. Don't worry, he's just being dramatic." The group didn't respond immediately, but I noticed within an hour they had taken the segment off their page. A small win, but not enough. That evening, Lucas showed me a clip that nearly made me laugh out loud. He had been walking his usual perimeter route when a teenager tried to record him with a phone, asking loaded questions about why he was protecting the gate from the public. Lucas, calm as ever, pointed to his badge and said, "I'm here to protect private property, not to debate someone's Instagram reel." The kid eventually left, but it was obvious Karen's influence was spreading. She had seeded the idea that this was some kind of class war, a fight between community good and selfish new money, and that narrative was starting to gain sympathy. So, I pivoted. I uploaded a short video of my own. Just a quiet, clear walkthrough of the property with voiceover explaining the history of the cabin, my grandfather's legacy, and the boundaries outlined by law. No anger, no confrontation, just facts layered over peaceful footage of the land, the ocean, and the signs Karen had so often ignored. I uploaded it to the neighborhood message board, YouTube, and sent it privately to a few contacts who had previously questioned my motive. The video didn't go viral, but within 48 hours, I started getting messages. One came from an older man named Doug, a retired police officer who lived across the street. "I watched your video," he wrote. "Never realized how far this had gone. You handled it with class. Let me know if you ever need someone to speak to the HOA." Another came from a woman who had served on the board years ago. She wrote, "Karen's done this before. Not this big, but similar. She wraps it in community charm, but it's always about control." And then, most unexpectedly, I received an anonymous email with an attachment, a clip of Karen at a recent HOA mixer laughing with 2 board members about turning the gate drama into a local legend. No.
Names, no proof of who sent it, but the file metadata placed it at a location just 2 blocks from the community clubhouse.
That clip was the nail in the coffin for me. I forwarded it to the county mediation office along with a request to formally petition for enforcement support if further incidents occurred. They responded the next day, informing me that they had logged the complaint and were prepared to act if she violated the warning again.
But even with the law closing in around her, Karen wasn't done.
The night after my
video circulated, she left a voicemail on my burner number,
the one I had used
when renting short-term beach properties in the past. Her voice was syrupy, falsely sweet.
Hey, just wanted to let you know that I really think we've had a miscommunication. I'd love to meet and talk things through. No hard feelings. Right?
We're neighbors after all.
I didn't respond.
The next morning, Lucas reported that someone had stood outside the fence in the dark for nearly 10 minutes, just beyond the motion lights.
Reach.
The footage was grainy, but the outline and hair matched Karen's frame.
She didn't enter. She didn't speak. She just stood there watching the cabin like a ghost trying to memorize a house she'd once imagined as her own. I reviewed the footage 3 times. I didn't feel scared. I felt resolved. Karen wasn't
going to go quietly, but she was losing the narrative, and she knew it.
She had tried everything.
Passive manipulation, aggressive charm, social sabotage, even
the media.
And now, as those failed, she was left with theatrics and silence. That Friday, the news station posted a follow-up segment on their site.
It was
short, barely 90 seconds, but it featured a statement from the county confirming the property was legally private, along with a quote from the sheriff's office about the importance of respecting land boundaries.
No apology.
No correction, but it was a retraction in spirit, and Karen didn't appear in
the clip. The quiet didn't last. By the following Thursday, Karen had found a new way to provoke me. And this time, she didn't bother hiding it behind charm or community talk. At exactly 7:30 in
the morning, a rumbling truck arrived at the edge of the cul-de-sac and began unloading a towering stack of lumber.
Metal poles and several large crates marked with bold red lettering.
I watched from the cabin porch, coffee in hand, eyebrows lifting as I recognized the face stepping out of the truck, a man in a polo shirt with a clipboard. And the kind of self-important strut that screams subcontractor.
He walked directly toward Karen's property, and moments later, she emerged wearing leggings and a neon windbreaker,
smiling and pointing toward the narrow strip of grass that separated her yard from my fence.
I couldn't hear their
conversation, but their gestures were clear. They were marking distance, pacing the property line, measuring with exaggerated movements as though trying to justify what I already knew would be a deliberate encroachment.
By the time I
crossed the porch and moved toward the gate, the workers were already digging post holes, and Karen was holding what looked like a printed zoning variance form in her hand. I called out her name calmly but firmly, and she turned with a smile so wide it nearly cracked.
Oh, hey, just getting some things done. Nothing to worry about, just beautifying the space. You understand, right? Property value and all that. Beautifying
meant building a pergola-style structure along the edge of her yard, tall enough to loom above my fence and cast shadows across my garden bed. I hadn't even planted them yet, but I could already see how the structure would rob my lot
of its direct morning light.
The design was deliberate, spiteful, and smug and architected, not to block the sun entirely, but just enough to irritate.
I
asked her if she'd gotten it approved.
She said yes.
When I asked for a copy of the permit, she shrugged and said it was posted on her garage window if I really cared to look. Of course, I did more than look.
I walked straight to the
Window, photographed the form, and emailed it to the county office within 15 minutes.
The response came by noon.
The permit was real, but it didn't cover what she was building.
It was for a
temporary decorative awning, not a permanent structure, and it certainly didn't authorize building within 5 feet of
the property line.
I forwarded that response to the HOA and the sheriff's office and copied Lucas, who happened to be on the property that day, watching everything from his folding chair with the stoicism of a retired general,
waiting for orders.
That evening, a county inspector showed up unannounced and started taking photos of the
construction site. Karen rushed outside in a sundress, feigning ignorance. I didn't know there was an issue. I just assumed everything was fine. I hired professionals after all. I mean, why wouldn't they know the rules?
Her voice
carried just far enough for me to hear from the other side of the fence. The inspector didn't argue. He just jotted
down notes, gave her a thin smile, and said someone would be following up.
I watched her eyes narrow as he turned away.
The moment he left, she pivoted toward my fence and called out sweetly,
"I hope this isn't about you. I'd hate for our little disagreement to turn into something nasty." I didn't reply.
The less I said, the clearer the contrast became.
She wanted a fight. I wanted proof.
The next day, the sheriff's office issued a stop work order.
The workers disappeared by lunchtime.
The truck gone without a word.
The project halted with posts still poking awkwardly
out of the soil like broken ribs.
Karen was livid. Not visibly, no shouting or
tantrum, but a slow-burn fury that showed in her posture. Her narrowed glances. The way she began walking past my property twice a day.
Each time pausing just long enough to let me know she was watching. I let her watch. I spent the weekend painting the fence, cleaning the
windows, and organizing the garden beds she'd tried to shade.
Lucas kept watch. Quiet and unshaken.
And then on Sunday morning, she cracked again.
I woke to
the sound of voices, not loud, but urgent, and not from her yard this time.
From mine.
I rushed to the window and saw Karen standing at the gate facing Lucas, her hands moving in sharp gestures. I stepped outside just in time to hear her say, "You're seriously going
to stand there and pretend this is normal? That I'm not allowed to ask a few questions?" She saw me and pivoted. Instantly. "He's refusing to let me speak to you." I was trying to be civil. "You've made this into a war zone." I kept my voice calm. "You're trespassing again. Please step back." She didn't.
She crossed her arms and said, "I've lived
here longer than you've even known this place existed. I've walked this sand before you could spell property rights. You think this is about land, but it's not. It's about respect, and you've got none." Lucas stepped slightly in front of her, just enough to draw a line without touching her.
She glared, then
stepped back, muttering something under her breath before turning and walking away. That evening, I compiled the footage.
Her crossing the gate, her arguing with Lucas, her stepping 3 feet onto the lot and waving her arms like she was presenting a closing argument in a courtroom.
I sent it to
Deputy Martinez, who responded 2 hours later, confirming she had now violated the active trespass order and that a citation would be issued.
He asked if I
wanted to press for charges. I said yes, not out of spite, out of exhaustion, out of the need to stop pretending this was just about sand and fences, because it never was. This was about a person who believed rules didn't apply if they smiled enough and who thought history
entitled them to rewrite the present.
And that person had just crossed the line again, this time with a witness, a
badge, and a camera, all recording in harmony. The citation arrived Tuesday. I
watched from my window as the officer knocked on her door. She opened it, didn't invite him in, and stood there
for 5 minutes arguing until finally taking the envelope. She didn't slam the door. She didn't weep.
She just stared at the paper in her hands like it had betrayed her. Then she looked up right
at me and held the paper in the air like a flag. "You think this changes anything?" she shouted. "It's still my beach. Always has been, always will be. The neighborhood doesn't want you here. You're a virus in this community."
Her voice echoed down the street.
Windows
opened, curtains move, and for the first time, I didn't look away.
I stood on my porch and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You can scream all you want.
The law's not listening to your voice anymore, just your actions." Then I walked inside and closed the door behind
me. That night, Elise texted me. She said the clip had been shared on a neighborhood group chat and was making its round. Someone had even turned the quote into a meme. Karen holding the citation with the caption, "It's still my beach."
Phil messaged too, saying
people were finally seeing the truth. Not just about the land, but about her.
The myth of Karen as the sweet misunderstood neighbor was crumbling. The day of the court hearing arrived. With a sky so unnaturally clear it felt almost staged.
I stood outside the
municipal building in my best button-down, a neatly compiled binder of documentation under one arm and a quiet sense of anticipation that wasn't quite nerves but wasn't comfort either.
Lucas
had accompanied me, not as a witness this time, but as a friend, sitting quietly beside me on the bench just
outside the courtroom entrance, nodding whenever I asked something aloud that didn't really need an answer. Karen arrived 20 minutes late, stepping from her car in heels too tall for the cracked pavement and sunglasses too dark
for the courtroom's fluorescent light. She carried nothing, no folders, no papers, no evidence. Just that same posture she always had when she wanted to appear both inconvenienced and noble. As she entered the building, she cast a glance in my direction.
Not hostile this time, but unreadable.
For the first time, there was no performance, no smile, no wave, just a woman walking into a room where the version of the story she'd clung to for months could no longer be shaped by whispers or charm.
Inside, the courtroom was modest.
No dramatic gavel slams or rising orchestras, just a few rows of benches. A wooden desk, and a tired judge who looked like she'd seen one too many neighbor disputes turn into months-long
vendettas.
When our case was called, we both stepped forward.
Karen began
speaking before she was even fully settled, launching into an impassioned summary of how the beach had always been shared, how my presence had divided the neighborhood, how my actions were exclusionary and aggressive and lacked
any sense of decency.
The judge held up a hand without even looking at her.
"Please stop. You'll have time to respond. Let's begin with the documented
history." I handed over my binder neatly labeled with printouts of county deeds, survey maps, time-stamped photos, screenshots of surveillance footage, the signed trespass warnings, HOA emails, and a burned DVD with 2 months of video clip. It was overkill, maybe, but I didn't want a single detail left to chance. The judge took her time reviewing the first few pages. Then she looked up at Karen.
"Do you have any documentation of property rights or permitted use?" Karen hesitated. Not on me. No. But if you asked anyone in the neighborhood, they'd tell you I've always used that area. That's not legal. Documentation. That's hearsay. This case involves repeated access to property the county recognizes as privately owned. Did you or did you not receive a written warning from the sheriff's department to cease entry?
She stammered, trying to spin the situation into another
miscommunication, but it didn't land.
Her voice lost its rhythm. Her words circled without impact, and the judge's expression didn't budge.
The verdict was clear before it was even read. The judge ordered a formal no-contact boundary
between Karen and the property, enforced by a local ordinance that prohibited her from setting foot on or leaning anything
against the fence or encouraging others to do so. Any violation would result in escalating penalties, including possible fines or arrest. Karen didn't argue. She didn't cry.
She just stood there, chin slightly raised, as if she still believed the story could be salvaged somehow.
But it was done. The paper was signed. The boundary was law. And for the first time, it wasn't just me who believed it. It was recorded, stamped, filed. Walking out of that building, I felt the air shift. Not dramatically,
not with cheers or closure, but with a quiet settling of something long unsettled.
Like a knot in my chest had finally loosened. I didn't expect celebration, and I didn't get it. What I got instead were nods, small acknowledgments.
A few neighbors who had once stood firmly in Karen's corner
began to send quiet messages over the next few days. Not apologies exactly, but admissions. One said, "I didn't know the whole story." Another said, "I should have spoken up sooner." Even the HOA, usually spineless in its neutrality, sent a message stating they respected the court's decision and would abide by the terms of enforcement, which, in other words, meant Karen had finally burned through her political capital. And just like that, the air got lighter. A week later, I opened the gate, not for her, but for the rest of the community. I hosted a beach cleanup.
Myself, this time properly coordinated with the lot clearly marked in chairs
set up just outside the fence line for refreshments. Everyone was welcome, and many showed up. I didn't bring it up. I didn't mention her.
I just handed out gloves, water bottles, and trash bags and worked beside people who had once
questioned every move I made. By the end of the day, the shoreline gleamed and conversations flowed. Lucas grilled burgers. Elise brought cookies. Even
Phil played music from his old stereo.
No one asked about Karen. And when someone jokingly said, "So, are you putting a moat in next?" I just laughed and said, "Maybe a drawbridge." The tension had broken. The fence hadn't pushed people away. It had just made it clear where things stood. And once that line was respected, everything else settled into place. Karen didn't disappear. She still lived there, still watered her flowers, still waved at passing cars, but she never approached the gate again. Not once. She stopped walking past my lot, stopped making signs or subtle digs in HOA meetings. She became quieter, less visible. Maybe out of shame, maybe out of exhaustion. Or maybe because she'd finally realized that no matter how many times she told the story her way, the ending wasn't hers to rewrite. It belonged to the law and to me. I never wanted revenge. Not truly. What I wanted was peace. A space to honor the place my grandfather loved. A place to sit on the porch and drink coffee without wondering whose towel would appear on my sand the next morning. And now I had that. The gate still stood. The cameras still blinked. But they were no longer about defense. They were just reminders, silent and patient, that some stories don't need to be shouted to be heard. They just need to be told clearly and completely. And that's what I had done. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't retaliated. I just told the truth every time and let it pile up like stones until even the loudest story in the world couldn't drown it out. Months later, as spring turned into summer again, I hosted a small barbecue on the porch. Not a statement, not a spectacle, just a quiet gathering of people who now understood the boundary not as a wall, but as a line of trust. Elise brought a bottle of wine.
Phil told terrible joke. Lucas sat back with his hands behind his head, looking out toward the sunset with a small, satisfied grin.
Someone asked
if I planned to expand the cabin. I said, maybe a garden, maybe a
guest house someday.
But for now, just this, just quiet, just the porch, the fence, and the sound of waves hitting the sand that for the first time in a long time felt like it truly belonged to
me.
Not because I claimed it louder, but because I stood my ground.
And in the end, that was all it took.
A gate, a guard, and the patience to let truth outlast noise.
Karen's story had finally ended. Mine had only just begun.